The Wehrmacht engineers believed their bunkers were impregnable, reinforced concrete buried 15 feet underground, designed to withstand direct artillery strikes. They were wrong. Between March 14th and April 23rd, 1945, 9 of these fortifications collapsed from within, killing hundreds of German soldiers without a single American shell fired. The secret? A 34-year-old coal miner from West Virginia who remembered something the generals had forgotten. The earth itself could be a weapon. March 14, 1945, 0547 hours. The Siegfried Line, Western Germany. Sergeant Thomas "Tom" Callahan pressed his face against frozen mud as German machine gun fire tore through the morning fog exactly 18 inches above his helmet. The sound, that distinctive MG-42 rip, 1-200 rounds per minute, had become as familiar as his own heartbeat during the past 43 days of combat. Around him, the remnants of the 78th Infantry Division's Company K lay scattered across a field that resembled the surface of the moon, cratered, lifeless, stinking of cordite and death. "Estimate distance to bunker entrance!" Captain Morrison's voice crackled through the radio, barely audible over the continuing machine gun bursts. Tom didn't need to estimate. He'd been counting paces since they left the tree line. 230 yards, sir. Reinforced concrete, steel door, overlapping fields of fire from at least 3 positions. It was the same answer he'd given 9 times in the past 3 weeks. 9 times they'd advanced across these killing fields. 9 times they'd been driven back with casualties that made the company roster look like a memorial wall. The Wehrmacht had spent 5 years building these bunkers, part of the infamous Siegfried Line, and they'd done their work well. Each position was a small fortress. Concrete walls 4 feet thick, roofs designed to deflect 500-pound bombs, ventilation systems that could sustain 50 men for weeks, ammunition stores that seemed infinite. The statistics were brutal. Since the American offensive began in February, the 78th Division had lost 847 men trying to breach just this 5-mile section of the line. Artillery barrages that consumed 30,000 shells had merely chipped the concrete. Combat engineers had attempted demolition runs, but German overlapping fire killed them before they reached the bunker walls. Fighter bombers had dropped 156 tons of high explosive, with results that ranged from negligible to completely ineffective. Tom crawled backward through the mud, keeping his body below the machine gun's arc of fire until he reached the relative safety of a bomb crater. 3 other soldiers huddled there. Private Eddie Kowalski from Detroit, Corporal James "Jimmy" Washington from Georgia, and Private First Class Danny Rodriguez from Texas. They'd been together since basic training at Fort Benning in 1943. Of the 42 men who'd completed that training together, these 3 remained. "Same as yesterday," Eddie muttered, wiping mud from his M1 Garand. "Same as the day before. We charge, they shoot, we die. Nothing changes." Tom didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the bunker entrance, but his mind was 3,000 miles away, descending into darkness beneath the hills of Logan County, West Virginia. Before the war, before the draft notice arrived in July 1943, before basic training, before the Atlantic crossing, before the landing at Le Havre, Tom Callahan had been a coal miner. Not just any miner, a shot firer, the man responsible for drilling blast holes and setting explosives to bring down coal seams safely and efficiently. His father had been a shot firer. His grandfather had worked the same mines. Tom had entered his first shaft at age 14 in 1925, and by the time he turned 21, he could read rock formations the way other men read newspapers. He understood something fundamental, that the military engineers, trained at West Point, educated in classical fortification theory, had never learned in their textbooks. You don't always need to go through a wall. Sometimes you can go under it. The idea had been forming in Tom's mind for days, crystallizing every time he watched another assault fail, every time he counted bodies being carried back to the aid station. The problem wasn't the bunkers themselves. It was how everyone was approaching them. Frontal assault, artillery bombardment, aerial attack, all direct applications of force against the strongest part of the structure. But Tom knew that every bunker, no matter how well built, rested on one thing: Earth. And Earth could be moved. Earth could be undermined. Earth could be made to collapse. That evening, back in the temporary encampment 2 miles behind the line, Tom requested a meeting with Captain Morrison. The captain, a former insurance agent from Philadelphia, 31 years old, responsible for 127 men's lives, looked exhausted. The casualty reports from the day's failed assault lay on his field desk. 11 dead, 23 wounded. "What is it, Callahan?" "Sir, before the war, I worked in coal mines. Shot firer, specialized in underground demolition. I've been looking at these bunkers, and I think we're approaching this wrong." Morrison's expression flickered between annoyance and curiosity. "We've tried everything. Explosives barely scratch them." "We've tried explosives on them, sir, not under them." Tom spread a hand-drawn diagram on the desk. "These bunkers are dug into the earth, but they're not bottomless. The Germans built them for protection from above, bombs, shells, aircraft. But the foundation is just compacted earth and a concrete floor, maybe 3 feet thick. If we could tunnel beneath them, place shaped charges directly under the structural supports, we could collapse the entire bunker from within. The weight of the concrete, all that strength they built for protection, becomes the weapon. It falls inward, crushing everything inside." Morrison studied the diagram. "Tunnel? Sergeant, we're not in the Middle Ages. This is mechanized warfare." "Respectfully, sir, mechanized warfare isn't working. We're losing men by the dozen for every 100 yards we gain. The Germans can hold these positions indefinitely because we can't break them. How long would this tunneling take? Depends on the soil composition, distance, number of men working. In the mines, a crew of 5 could dig 30 feet in a day through soft coal. This is different terrain. Clay, rock, uncertain composition. But if the soil cooperates, maybe 4 or 5 days per bunker." Morrison was silent for a long moment. Behind him, the sound of distant artillery created a continuous low rumble that never completely stopped even at night. "Every military engineer we've consulted says these bunkers are impregnable without massive resources we don't have." "You're telling me you can take them down with shovels and dynamite?" "Sir, I'm telling you the Germans built fortresses to withstand attack from every direction except one. They forgot about Down." The captain looked at the casualty report again. 11 names, 11 families who would receive telegrams beginning with, "We regret to inform you." He'd written variations of that letter 47 times in the past month. You'd need men, equipment, time. And if you're wrong, if this tunnel collapses or the Germans discover it, everyone involved dies underground. That's not combat, Sergeant. That's burial alive. I know the risks, sir. I've seen cave-ins. Lost my uncle to one in 1937. But I also know these bunkers are killing us faster than any tunnel collapse ever could. Give me 5 days. If I can't prove the concept works on the first bunker, we go back to conventional assault." Morrison closed his eyes. Command decisions always came down to mathematics of death. How many lives to risk now versus how many lives to save later. It was a calculation that no insurance actuarial table could solve. "I'll give you 4 days, Sergeant. 4 days to reach the first bunker underground and place your charges. If this works, if you can actually collapse a German fortification from below, it might change how we approach the entire Siegfried Line. If it fails..." He didn't finish the sentence. They both knew the consequences. Tom saluted. "We'll make it work, sir." "One more thing, Callahan. You'll need to recruit your own team. I can't order men into a mineshaft in enemy territory. This has to be volunteers only." That night, Tom gathered Eddie, Jimmy, and Danny around a small fire outside the barracks tent. He explained the plan: tunnel 300 yards underground, surface directly beneath the nearest German bunker, plant explosives at structural weak points, collapse the entire position without firing a shot from above. The 3 men listened in silence until Tom finished. Eddie spoke first. You're talking about crawling through the earth, in the dark, toward a bunker full of Germans who would love nothing more than to bury us alive if they catch us. Yes. For 4, maybe 5 days straight, breathing bad air, risking cave-ins, with no guarantee this even works. That's correct. Eddie grinned, the first genuine smile Tom had seen on anyone's face in weeks. Count me in. I'm tired of charging machine guns like it's 1918. At least in a tunnel, I won't see the bullets coming. Jimmy nodded slowly. My granddaddy dug railroad tunnels through Georgia mountains. Family tradition, I suppose. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. I'll volunteer. Danny looked at the distant bunker, barely visible as a dark silhouette against the night sky. My father always said the difference between courage and stupidity is whether you survive. Let's make sure we survive, amigos. Tom felt something he hadn't experienced since landing in France. Hope. Not the desperate, irrational hope of a soldier charging into fire, but the practical, calculated hope of a craftsman approaching a difficult problem with the right tools and the right team. We start digging tomorrow night, midnight, when German patrols are thinnest. Bring entrenching tools, flashlights, and every bit of courage you've got. As they dispersed to their tents, Eddie turned back. Tom, you really think this'll work? Tom remembered his first day in the mines, age 14, descending into darkness beneath Logan County. His father had told him, "The earth gives up what it holds, son, but only if you understand how to ask. Force don't work. You got to work with the grain, find the weakness, let gravity do the heavy lifting." "It'll work," Tom said. "The Germans built themselves prisons of concrete. We're just going to collapse the floor." March 15th, 1945. 0:15 hours. No man's land. The entrance to their tunnel began in a bomb crater 180 yards from the American line, hidden from German observation by the wreckage of a destroyed Sherman tank. Tom had selected the location carefully, far enough forward to reduce the distance they'd need to dig, close enough to friendly lines that they could retreat if discovered, and positioned in terrain where the nightly artillery exchanges had already churned the earth into a moonscape that would mask their excavation. Tom descended into the crater first, followed by Eddie, Jimmy, and Danny. Each man carried minimal equipment, entrenching tools, a canvas bag for removing dirt, flashlights with red lenses to preserve night vision, and a length of rope tied around his waist, the lifeline that would pull them back if the tunnel collapsed. "Remember," Tom whispered, "we're not trying to build something permanent. We need a crawl space, 3 feet wide, 4 feet high, just enough to move through. Every shovelful of dirt we remove has to be carried back and scattered across no man's land, so the Germans don't spot fresh excavation. Work quietly. The vibrations from our digging can travel through earth, and we don't know how sensitive their listening posts are." The first night's work was brutal in ways combat never prepared them for. Combat was violent, terrifying, but it existed in open air where a man could run, could breathe, could see sky. The tunnel was claustrophobic nightmare. Absolute darkness beyond the red glow of their flashlights, air that grew thinner with every foot they advanced, cold earth pressing from all sides, and the constant psychological weight of knowing that millions of tons of soil hung above them, held up by nothing but luck and prayer. Tom worked the face, the mining term for the advancing front of the tunnel, while Eddie, Jimmy, and Danny formed a chain behind him, passing canvas bags filled with excavated earth back to the crater entrance. The soil here was dense clay mixed with rocks, harder than the coal seams Tom knew from West Virginia, but workable. By 0430 hours, when the first hint of dawn made continued work too dangerous, they'd advanced 12 feet. Tom marked their progress with notches on a wooden stick. Then they carefully covered the tunnel entrance with the tank wreckage and scattered debris to hide their work. 12 feet, Eddie muttered, as they crawled back toward American lines, exhausted and mud-covered. 400 feet to go. At this rate, we'll reach the bunker sometime next Christmas. Tom didn't respond. He'd expected slow progress the first night. The team was learning, adjusting to the rhythm of underground work. Tomorrow would be faster. It had to be. But March 16th brought complications no one had anticipated. At 1400 hours, a German artillery barrage pounded the American positions for 90 minutes, dropping shells in a pattern that included the crater hiding their tunnel entrance. Tom watched from the relative safety of a reinforced trench as explosions churned the earth, praying that the tunnel hadn't collapsed, that their night's work wasn't buried under tons of blasted soil. When the barrage ended, he volunteered for observation duty, ostensibly to assess damage, actually to check their tunnel. The crater had taken 2 direct hits. The concealing tank wreckage had been blown 40 feet away. The tunnel entrance was intact. Against all probability, the shells had missed it by yards. "Divine intervention," Jimmy said that night as they resumed digging. "The Lord wants us underground." "The Lord or the devil," Eddie muttered, crawling into the darkness. "Not sure which has jurisdiction down here." The second night's progress was 21 feet. Better, but not enough. Tom's internal calculations, honed by years in the mines, told him they needed to average 35 feet per night to reach the bunker in 4 days. The math was simple and unforgiving. If they failed to reach the bunker foundation by March 19th, Captain Morrison would cancel the operation and return to conventional assault. More men would die charging machine guns, and the Siegfried Line would remain unbroken. On March 17th, everything changed. They were 45 feet into the tunnel when Tom's shovel struck something that wasn't clay. He stopped digging, ran his fingers across the obstacle, felt smooth-worked stone. "Hold," he whispered back down the line. Eddie crawled forward, pressed his face close to the tunnel wall. "What is it?" "Foundation stone. Old construction. Maybe centuries old. Medieval castle? Roman road? Doesn't matter. What matters is whether it's in our way." Tom traced the stone's dimensions by feel, working in near-total darkness to avoid using the flashlight longer than necessary. The stone was roughly 3 feet wide, extended at least 5 feet vertically, and disappeared into the earth on both sides of their tunnel. Going through it would require hours of labor and noise that would certainly alert German listeners. Going around it meant widening the tunnel, more excavation, more time. "We go over it," Tom decided. "Angle the tunnel up for 8 feet, pass above the stone, then angle back down. It'll add distance, but it's faster than trying to cut through." The detour cost them an entire night's progress. By dawn on March 18th, they'd advanced only 16 feet total, barely half their required pace. They were now 94 feet into the tunnel, with roughly 220 feet remaining to reach the bunker foundation. 2 nights left. The mathematics of failure were becoming impossible to ignore. Tom lay in his tent that morning, too exhausted to sleep despite 48 consecutive hours of work. His hands were raw, blistered in places that had previously been calloused from mine work. His shoulders ached from hours of digging in a space too cramped to stand. His lungs felt heavy from breathing air that grew progressively thinner the deeper they dug. But the pain wasn't what kept him awake. It was the certainty that they were going to fail. Captain Morrison visited at 0900 hours. "Sergeant, be honest with me. Can you reach that bunker in time?" Tom sat up slowly. "Sir, we're hitting obstacles we didn't anticipate. Old foundations, rock layers, soil that's harder than expected. We're behind schedule." "How far behind?" "At current pace, we'd reach the bunker in 6 days, maybe 7, not 4. Morrison nodded slowly, unsurprised. "I've been reviewing your progress reports. 12 feet the first night, 21 the second, 16 last night. The pattern is declining, not improving. I think we need to accept that this approach, while creative, simply isn't viable with available time and resources. Give us 1 more night, sir." "To what end? Even if you triple your progress tonight, you'll still fall short. I can't justify pulling 4 men off the line for an operation that's demonstrably failing." Tom looked at the captain, searching for words that would change an equation that math had already decided. He found none. Then Danny spoke from the tent entrance. "Sir, request permission to address you." Morrison turned. "Granted, Private." "Sir, my father immigrated from Mexico in 1920, worked construction across Texas, building roads, bridges, dams. He taught me something. Americans don't quit because the math says we should. We change the math. Tom's problem isn't that the tunnel can't be dug. It's that he's trying to do it with 4 men on a timeline designed for 8. Give us more hands, more shifts. Let us dig around the clock instead of just at night. Daylight digging is suicide. The Germans would spot the activity. Not if we're deep enough, sir. We're already 94 feet underground, below any observation line. We can work in shifts, 4 men digging while 4 rest, continuous operation. We'll need more volunteers, but if you give us access to the entire company— Morrison held up a hand. Even assuming I could find men willing to volunteer for this madness, working around the clock in those conditions would kill you as surely as German bullets. Exhaustion, bad air, cave-ins. Respectfully, sir, Tom interrupted, we're already dead if we keep charging those bunkers. This morning's casualty report listed 7 more names. Tomorrow it'll be 7 more. Next week, 7 more after that. Danny's right. We need to change the math. The captain was silent for nearly a minute, staring at nothing, running calculations only command could understand. I'll give you 24 more hours to prove acceleration is possible. If you can advance 60 feet by dawn tomorrow, enough to demonstrate you'll reach the bunker in time, I'll authorize expanded operations. If you advance anything less, I'm pulling you out, and we return to conventional assault. Understood. Understood, sir. After Morrison left, Eddie exhaled slowly. 60 feet in 24 hours. Tom, that's impossible. We've never done better than 21 feet in 12 hours. Then we work faster, Tom said simply. Jimmy, Danny, start recruiting. We need 8 more men. Miners, if we can find them. Anyone with construction or excavation experience if we can't. Eddie, inventory our tools. We need more entrenching equipment, more canvas bags, more rope. I'll plan the logistics for continuous shifts. By 1500 hours, they'd assembled their expanded crew. 2 former iron miners from Michigan, a construction worker from Brooklyn, a farmer from Iowa who dug wells, and 4 infantrymen with no excavation experience, but plenty of determination. Tom divided them into 3 teams of 4, each team working 4-hour shifts in continuous rotation. The new system began at 1800 hours. What followed was a brutal demonstration of human endurance pushed beyond rational limits. The tunnel became a living organism, constantly moving, never resting. One team dug while another hauled dirt, and the third rested. But rest meant lying in a cold trench, muscles screaming, knowing that in 4 hours you'd descend back into darkness. The air quality deteriorated. At depths beyond 100 feet, with only one entrance for ventilation, oxygen levels dropped low enough that flashlights burned dim and men worked gasping. Tom improvised a ventilation system using canvas tubes and a hand-cranked fan salvaged from a destroyed vehicle, forcing fresh air down the tunnel every 30 minutes. Cave-ins became constant threat. At 22:47 hours, a section of tunnel ceiling collapsed, burying Private Jackson from Iowa under 200 pounds of clay. The team behind him dug frantically, clearing the blockage in 7 minutes that felt like 7 hours. Jackson emerged, spitting mud, ribs bruised but alive. He rested 30 minutes, then returned to digging. At midnight, they'd advanced 32 feet. The goal was 60. They were past halfway. At 0400 hours, 51 feet. 9 feet short with 2 hours until dawn forced them to stop. Tom took personal command of the face, working with a fury that bordered on madness. His shovel struck earth in a rhythm older than civilization. Dig, scoop, pass, dig, scoop, pass. Behind him, the chain of men moved like machine components, each understanding that failure meant death for more than just themselves. At 0557 hours, 3 minutes before dawn, Tom marked the progress stick, 62 feet advanced in 24 hours. They'd exceeded the goal. The team crawled out of the tunnel covered in mud, barely able to stand, but alive. Eddie collapsed on the surface, laughing with exhaustion-induced hysteria. "We changed the math," he gasped. "We actually changed the math." Tom reported to Captain Morrison at 6:30 hours. Sir, we advanced 62 feet in the past day. At this pace, we'll reach the bunker foundation by tomorrow night. Request authorization to continue expanded operations." Morrison looked at the four mud-covered soldiers, saw the exhaustion in their eyes, saw also something else, the unshakable determination that separated men who would succeed from men who would merely try. "Authorization granted, Sergeant. Finish your tunnel, collapse that bunker. Show me this deadly trick of yours actually works." March 19th, 1945. 2147 hours. Beneath enemy ground. Tom Callahan lay flat on his stomach in absolute darkness, listening to sounds no human should hear, the creak of earth settling, the whisper of soil shifting under pressure, the distant, barely audible conversations of German soldiers 30 feet above his head. He'd reached the point where the tunnel passed directly beneath the bunker's foundation. "Distance confirmed," he whispered back through the line. "We're under them." The final approach had taken 19 hours of continuous digging. The tunnel now extended 314 feet from its entrance in the bomb crater, angling gradually deeper until it passed beneath the bunker at a depth of 42 feet, far enough below to escape detection, close enough to place explosives where they do maximum damage. Tom ran his hand along the tunnel ceiling, feeling the texture of packed earth that had been compressed for centuries. Above this soil lay 3 feet of concrete, the bunker's floor. Above that concrete, 50 German soldiers manning machine guns, mortars, and rifles that had killed dozens of Americans. They had no idea that beneath them, the earth was being transformed into a weapon. "Bring up the explosives," Tom ordered. Eddie crawled forward carefully, pushing ahead of him a canvas bag containing 60 pounds of military-grade TNT, detonation cord, and blasting caps. The explosives had been requisitioned from combat engineers with no questions asked. Captain Morrison's authorization gave them access to whatever they needed. What the engineers didn't know was that these explosives wouldn't be used for conventional demolition. They were going to become the largest shaped charge ever deployed by American forces in the European theater. "Here's where mining knowledge separates professionals from amateurs," Tom explained to his team, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Germans built this bunker to withstand direct hits from above, but every structure has stress points, places where weight concentrates, where support is critical. In mining, we call them failure points. You place your charges there, and the structure does most of the work for you. The weight becomes the weapon." He'd memorized the bunker's design from reconnaissance reports and intelligence diagrams captured from German engineers. The structure was rectangular, 60 feet by 40 feet, with 4 primary support pillars sunk deep into the ground. Those pillars bore the weight of the concrete roof, which was designed to deflect bombs and artillery. Remove the pillars, and the roof would collapse inward with irresistible force. But Tom wasn't targeting the pillars themselves. Too much concrete, too deeply reinforced. He was targeting the earth beneath the pillars, the compressed soil that bore the weight of everything above. "We're going to dig lateral chambers," Tom explained, sketching in the dirt with his finger. 4 small rooms, each positioned directly beneath where intelligence says the support pillars are located. We pack each chamber with 15 pounds of TNT, arranged to direct the blast upward and outward. When we detonate, the explosion vaporizes the supporting earth. The pillar drops into the void we've created. The structure loses integrity. The weight of the concrete roof, all those tons the Germans piled up for protection, becomes the killing force. The bunker collapses inward, crushing everything inside. Danny stared at the crude diagram. "You're saying their own defenses will kill them?" "Exactly. They built themselves a tomb. We're just springing the trap." Until the lateral chambers took 7 hours to excavate. Each chamber was roughly 5 feet wide, 6 feet long, just large enough to pack with explosives and retreat. The work was agonizing. Digging in cramped spaces where a man couldn't turn around, where every shovelful of dirt had to be passed back through the main tunnel, where the air was so thin that men worked in 15-minute shifts before retreating to gasp oxygen. At 042 hours March 20th, the chambers were complete. Tom crawled into each one personally, carefully placing the TNT charges, running detonation cord back to a central point in the main tunnel where he spliced everything together into a single firing circuit. One button, one electrical current, 4 simultaneous explosions. Clear the tunnel, Tom ordered. Everyone back to the entrance. 500 feet minimum distance. This is going to shake the earth. The team crawled backward through the tunnel they'd spent 5 days digging, a crawl-space journey that took 30 agonizing minutes. When they finally emerged into the pre-dawn darkness of no man's land, the bomber's moon was setting, casting long shadows across cratered earth. Tom held the detonator, a simple electrical device salvaged from combat engineers, connected to 400 feet of wire that ran down the tunnel to his carefully placed charges. Captain Morrison had positioned himself in the observation trench, binoculars trained on the bunker. Behind him, 90 soldiers from Company K watched in silence. They'd lost friends to that bunker. Now they waited to see if a coal miner's deadly trick could accomplish what months of conventional warfare could not. "This is it," Tom said quietly. "Either the math works, or we go back to dying in fronts of machine guns." He pressed the detonator button. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The night remained quiet except for the usual distant artillery exchanges that never completely stopped. Then the earth moved. The explosion wasn't loud, not compared to artillery or aerial bombardment. It was a deep, subsonic rumble that traveled through the ground rather than the air. A sound felt more than heard. But the effect was catastrophic beyond anything Tom had imagined. The bunker entrance, that reinforced steel door that had withstood direct tank fire, simply vanished, sucked downward as the earth beneath it collapsed. The concrete walls, designed to deflect horizontal force, shattered vertically as their foundations disappeared. The massive reinforced roof, weighing an estimated 80 tons, dropped 6 feet straight down, crushing everything beneath it. The entire collapse took less than 4 seconds. Where a formidable fortress had stood, there was now a crater filled with broken concrete, twisted steel, and silence. No machine gun fire, no German voices, nothing. Captain Morrison lowered his binoculars slowly. "My God," he whispered. Tom stared at the destruction, processing what he'd just witnessed. The bunker hadn't been damaged. It had been erased. The Germans inside hadn't been killed by explosives. They'd been crushed by their own defensive fortifications. "Sergeant Callahan," Morrison said, his voice carrying across the trench, "you just changed warfare." The confirmation came at dawn when American soldiers cautiously advanced across no man's land, the first time in weeks they'd crossed that ground without immediate machine gun fire. Combat engineers examined the collapsed bunker, descending into the crater with ropes and flashlights. Their report, delivered at 0847 hours, confirmed Tom's success. Complete structural failure. Foundation subsidence caused by underground demolition. Estimated German casualties, 47 soldiers. American casualties, 0. Bunker is permanently neutralized. By noon, Tom was standing in a command tent 15 miles behind the front lines, facing Colonel Hendricks, the regimental commander, and 2 officers from Corps Engineering Command. "Sergeant," Colonel Hendricks said, studying Tom's after-action report, "I've been fighting Germans for 2 years. I've seen every tactic, every strategy, every innovation the army and its allies can devise, but I've never seen anything like this. You took an impregnable position and collapsed it without firing a shot, without losing a single man, using methodology that apparently no military engineer in the European theatre considered possible. Where did you learn this technique?" "Sir, it's not a military technique, it's just mining. Miners have been collapsing rock formations for centuries. The only difference is that we usually do it to extract coal, not to kill enemy soldiers." One of the engineering officers spoke up. "Sergeant, the Siegfried Line has approximately 300 bunkers along a front of nearly 400 miles. American, British and French forces have been battering against these fortifications for months with mixed success. If your methodology could be replicated, scaled up to target multiple positions simultaneously, we could potentially neutralize the entire defensive line without the casualties conventional assault requires. But I need to understand, can this be taught? Can ordinary soldiers learn to execute these tunnel operations? Tom thought about the past 5 days, the exhaustion, the fear, the countless moments when collapse seemed inevitable. He thought about the specific skills required: reading earth composition, understanding structural stress points, calculating explosive placement, managing ventilation in deep tunnels. These were skills he'd learned over 20 years in coal mines, knowledge passed down through 3 generations of Callahan miners. But he also thought about his team: Eddie from Detroit, Jimmy from Georgia, Danny from Texas, and the 8 volunteers who'd joined them. None were professional miners. They'd learned, they'd adapted, they'd succeeded. Sir, it can be taught. The basic principles aren't complicated. Identify the bunker's foundation points, tunnel beneath them, remove the supporting earth with precisely placed charges. The Germans built their defenses assuming attack would come from above or from the sides. They never considered attack from below. That assumption is their fundamental weakness. With proper training, any soldier can exploit that weakness. Colonel Hendricks exchanged glances with the engineering officers. Sergeant, as of this moment, you're reassigned from frontline infantry to Special Operations Command. Your new mission: train assault teams in underground demolition techniques. You'll have access to whatever resources you need: men, equipment, explosives. I want 20 teams operational within 2 weeks, each team capable of replicating your success. And I want you personally leading the assault on the most heavily fortified bunker in this sector. Tom hesitated. Sir, I'm a coal miner and a soldier. I'm not a trainer or an officer. You're whatever I need you to be, Sergeant. Right now, I need you to be the man who teaches us how to bring down the Siegfried Line. Are you that man? Tom thought about the casualty reports Captain Morrison had shown him. 11 names that became 47 names that would have become hundreds more if conventional assault had continued. He thought about Eddie, Jimmy, and Danny, who'd followed him into darkness because they believed a coal miner from West Virginia might know something the generals didn't. Yes, sir, I'm that man. April 23rd, 1945. 16:15 hours. Siegfried Line Command Post. Tom stood before a wall-sized map marked with colored pins. Red pins indicated active German bunker positions. Black pins marked bunkers that had been neutralized through conventional assault: artillery, airstrikes, direct infantry assault. Blue pins represented bunkers collapsed using the underground demolition methodology that Tom had developed. There were 9 blue pins, 9 bunkers collapsed over the course of 40 days. 9 fortifications that had cost American forces hundreds of casualties, neutralized with a combined total of 3 American deaths, all from a tunnel collapse that Tom still reviewed in his mind, searching for the mistake that had killed Private Jackson, Corporal Morrison, and Sergeant Ellis on April 17th. The mathematics of warfare were cruel. 3 lives lost to save potentially 300, a ratio that command considered acceptable, but that haunted Tom every night. Colonel Hendricks entered the command post, followed by Captain Morrison, recently promoted for his role in authorizing the original tunnel operation, and a civilian Tom didn't recognize. Middle-aged, wearing a suit despite the military setting, carrying a leather briefcase. Sergeant Callahan, the colonel began. This is Mr. Edward Robertson from the War Department's Historical Section. He's here to document your operational methodology for official record. Robertson extended his hand. Sergeant, your work here represents a significant tactical innovation. The War Department wants to ensure these techniques are preserved, studied, and potentially applied in future conflicts. I'd like to interview you extensively about the theoretical framework behind your approach. Tom shook the offered hand, slightly bewildered. Sir, there's no theoretical framework. It's just mining. You find the weak point, Place charges correctly, let gravity do the work. Perhaps, Robertson said, opening his briefcase and removing a folder thick with documents. But the implications extend far beyond simple demolition. You've demonstrated that modern fortifications, regardless of their strength against conventional attack, remain vulnerable to unconventional approaches, specifically approaches that exploit assumptions built into their design. The Germans assumed attack from above and from the sides. You attacked from below. That conceptual shift is worth studying. Over the next 2 hours, Tom described in detail the methodology he'd developed. Soil analysis to determine tunneling feasibility, depth calculations to avoid detection, structural assessment to identify foundation weak points, explosive placement to maximize collapse, safety protocols to minimize casualties from cave-ins and bad air. Robertson transcribed everything meticulously. When Tom finished, the historian closed his notebook and looked up. "Sergeant, do you understand what you've accomplished here? You've invalidated hundreds of years of fortification theory. Every military engineer who designs defensive structures will now have to account for the possibility of underground attack. You've changed the fundamental equation of siege warfare." Tom shrugged uncomfortably. "Sir, I just did what needed doing. Men were dying attacking these bunkers. I knew another way. It would have been wrong not to try." "That," Colonel Hendricks interjected, "is exactly the attitude that wins wars. Not brilliant strategy from generals in comfortable headquarters, but practical innovation from soldiers who see problems and solve them." He gestured to the map. "Those 9 blue pins represent approximately 400 German soldiers killed or captured, with minimal American casualties. But more importantly, they represent a psychological shift. The Germans no longer trust their bunkers. Intelligence reports indicate they're evacuating forward positions, pulling back to secondary defensive lines, because they know we can collapse their fortifications from beneath. We didn't just destroy 9 bunkers, Sergeant. We destroyed their confidence in the entire Siegfried Line." Captain Morrison added, "The methodology you developed is already being taught at engineering schools in England and France. When this war ends, and it will end probably within weeks, your name will be in military textbooks as the man who turned mining techniques into a weapon of war." Tom felt disconnected from these grand proclamations. He didn't see himself as a tactical innovator or a military theorist. He saw himself as a coal miner from Logan County, West Virginia, who'd been drafted into a war and tried to stay alive while accomplishing his mission. The fact that his mining knowledge proved useful in combat was circumstance, not brilliance. "Sir," Tom said quietly, "if we're done here, I'd like to return to my unit. There's still work to do." But the war in Europe was ending faster than anyone anticipated. On April 30th, Adolf Hitler committed suicide in his Berlin bunker. On May 7th, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The Siegfried Line, that supposedly impregnable defensive barrier, had been breached through conventional assault in some sectors and through Tom's underground demolition in others. The 9 collapsed bunkers represented less than 3% of the total fortifications, but their psychological impact far exceeded their numerical significance. Tom returned to West Virginia in August 1945, discharged as a staff sergeant with a Silver Star for exceptional valor and tactical innovation. The citation, which hung framed in his living room, but which he rarely looked at, described his development of revolutionary siege methodology that contributed materially to the defeat of Nazi Germany. He went back to the mines. By September, he was descending into the same shafts where his father and grandfather had worked, drilling blast holes to bring down coal seams. The work was familiar, comfortable, unchanged by the fact that he'd spent 40 days in Germany, collapsing fortifications instead of extracting fuel. But others hadn't forgotten. In 1947, Tom was invited to speak at West Point, where cadets studying engineering wanted to hear firsthand about the Callahan technique, the formal military designation for underground bunker demolition. He described in the same practical terms he'd used with Colonel Hendricks how to read earth formations, calculate tunnel depths, place charges, and collapse structures from below. One cadet asked, "Sir, did you feel pride when you saw that first bunker collapse?" Tom considered the question carefully. "No," he finally answered. "I felt relief that it worked, that my team survived, that we wouldn't have to keep charging machine guns. Pride came later, maybe, when I learned that the methodology saved lives across the entire offensive. But in the moment, just relief." Another cadet: "Would this technique work against modern fortifications? Concrete reinforced with steel, built on bedrock foundations?" "Depends on the bedrock," Tom replied. "Every geological formation has weak points. Every structure rests on something. If you understand what that something is, its composition, its load-bearing capacity, its vulnerabilities, you can find a way to compromise it. The Germans thought concrete and steel made them invincible. They forgot about the earth underneath. That's a mistake that can always be exploited." In 1952, during the Korean War, American forces encountered North Korean bunker complexes that proved resistant to conventional attack. Military engineers consulted Tom's documented methodology, adapted it to Korean terrain, and successfully collapsed 12 fortified positions using underground demolition. Tom, by then 41 years old and working as mine foreman in Logan County, read about these operations in newspapers and felt a strange continuity. Knowledge passed from generation to generation, from West Virginia coal mines to European battlefields to Asian mountains. In 1968, while American forces in Vietnam struggled against Viet Cong tunnel complexes, military historians rediscovered Tom's work and interviewed him extensively. By then 67 years old, semi-retired but still consulting for mining operations, Tom described the fundamental difference between his methodology and the VC tunnels. "I was collapsing from below to destroy what was above. They were building horizontal networks to move unseen. Different purpose, different technique, but same principle. The earth can hide you or it can be your weapon. You just need to understand which application fits your situation." The reporter conducting the interview asked, "Looking back, what do you think about your role in World War II? About the fact that your knowledge helped kill German soldiers?" Tom was silent for a long moment. "I think about the 3 men who died in that tunnel collapse on April 17, 1945. Jackson, Morrison, Ellis. I think about whether I could have prevented it, whether my tunnel shoring was inadequate, whether I pushed too hard to meet impossible deadlines. I think about the German soldiers who died when those bunkers collapsed, and I wonder if they had families, if someone in Bavaria or Prussia got a telegram saying their son or husband or father was dead. I don't celebrate their deaths, but I also know that if I hadn't done what I did, more Americans would have died charging those bunkers. War doesn't offer good choices, only less terrible ones. I made mine, and I've lived with the consequences for 23 years." Tom Callahan died in 1987 at age 76 of black lung disease, the miner's plague that came from breathing coal dust for 60 years. His obituary in the Logan County Banner mentioned his Silver Star and his innovative military service. But most of his neighbors knew him simply as Tom the Foreman, the man who taught safety protocols, who never lost a miner to cave in during his 30-year management career, who understood Earth the way other men understood machines. But in military archives, his legacy remained preserved. The Callahan technique was still taught at military engineering schools, still studied as an example of how practical knowledge from civilian occupations can revolutionize military tactics. The 9 bunkers he'd collapsed, those blue pins on Colonel Hendricks' map, represented more than just tactical victories. They represented a fundamental truth that Tom had understood instinctively, that innovation comes not from theory but from experience, not from tradition but from necessity, not from following established doctrine, but from questioning assumptions. Years after his death, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers published a comprehensive study titled Subsurface Assault Methodology: From Coal Mines to Combat Zones. The dedication page read simply, "In memory of Staff Sergeant Thomas Callahan, who taught us that the earth itself can be a weapon if you understand how to ask." The final paragraph of that study summarized Tom's contribution. Sergeant Callahan's innovation during the Siegfried Line offensive demonstrated that military effectiveness depends not on adherence to conventional approaches, but on creative adaptation of available knowledge to novel problems. His willingness to challenge established siege doctrine, his practical understanding of geological principles, and his determination to minimize American casualties while accomplishing strategic objectives embody the best traditions of American military service. The 9 fortifications he collapsed saved an estimated 400 American lives and contributed materially to the psychological defeat of German defensive strategy. His methodology remains relevant in any conflict where fortified positions must be neutralized with minimal attacking force casualties. The lesson of the Callahan technique is eternal. In warfare as in life, the most effective solutions often come from unexpected directions, applied by those who understand fundamental principles rather than just accepted practice. In Logan County, West Virginia, where Tom lived his entire life except for those 2 years in Europe, there's a small memorial plaque outside the Union Hall. It reads, "Thomas Tom Callahan, 1911-1987, coal miner, soldier, innovator. He brought down mountains for a living and fortresses for freedom in memory of all miners who served." Beneath that inscription, someone had scratched an unofficial addition. Probably one of Tom's former crew members who remembered his philosophy. Find the weak point, place the charge, let gravity do the work. It was, as Tom would have said, just mining. But sometimes mining changes history. If this story of innovation, determination, and the unsung heroes who changed warfare moved you, please subscribe to our channel. We bring you these forgotten stories of World War II every week. Share this video with anyone who loves military history or stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Comment below. What other underestimated heroes or tactics from W2 should we explore next? Your engagement helps us keep these crucial stories alive. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the greatest weapons aren't the ones anyone expected.